Sorry guys, I just had to change the memory cards. It's funny. So we got to here where actually you can see the fog is actually just sweeping around, rolling around those streets. And we see that through the enjambment as well. But what is it that fog, that smog, represents to her, sitting as she is waiting for the inevitable news of the death of her husband, behind whose webby fold on fold, and the idea of repetition there. You know, if you're waiting for some terrible news like that, obviously a minute is going to seem like an hour is going to seem like a day. And so we get this idea of repetition throughout this poem as well, as she waits. But also, using that word webby, obviously there's an idea that it obviously gives a rather claustrophobic atmosphere, this idea of the fog enclosing everything, the web that she is caught in, but it also suggests that she is as trapped by this situation just as much as her husband is. This time and this waiting, the fold on fold. And similarly, like a waning taper. The taper is a candle. Now, a thing like a candle obviously has connotations in terms of symbolism and metaphorical meaning. A candle is something which gives light in this darkness, but it's waning, it's deteriorating, it's dying. With that flame you get this idea of fragility of life, the very, very temporary nature of life, and the fragility of her as a person as well. Okay? And the street lamp outside glimmers cold. And you get this idea of a strangeness, this rather sort of oxymoronic idea. Okay, that the flame of the street lamp is cold. And the word glimmer itself isn't something which is shining a light. Again, that word glimmer, there's a softness to it and a fragility to it as well. So the impression we get from that opening stanza is not just the sense of the tragedy of the inevitability of the news which is going to come, but more than that as well, it's the fragility of the woman who is doing the waiting, the inevitability is what's going to happen, the waiting that she is doing, and the claustrophobia and the trapped nature of her situation. Okay? Even within, structurally, the gap there, if you are able to analyse a gap, analyse nothing, what's happening in that nothing? Well, nothing's happening in that nothing. That's the point. She's sitting there waiting still in that nothing. In that nothing, we also create a silence, which is absolutely relevant, because what happens to break that silence? A messenger's knock cracks smart, and we suddenly have, obviously, use of onomatopoeia. Okay? The silence is broken. And again, imagine her response at that point. Imagine the shock. Imagine waiting and waiting and waiting, and then hearing that knock, and her heart suddenly either being excited by the idea of company, but probably much more likely to be horrified by who it is actually knocking at the door with that news. A messenger's knock cracks smartly. Flashed news is in her hand. And again, the idea there, this horrible idea that somebody's life, honour, not so sure, somebody's life is represented by words in a telegram. And you can just imagine probably that postman outside, if it is indeed a postman rather than a messenger, knowing exactly what he has to deliver, and the wife opens the front door, and that news, and it said, sorry, blah, 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 but your husband has been killed on some foreign field, is flashed into her hand. It's done quickly. It's done without emotion. We can understand, maybe interpret why that's the case. Maybe the postman has seen so many of them. Maybe because he doesn't want to engage with the emotion. Maybe it's because in that moment it's happened, and she's in, well, it goes on to say, dazes. She's in absolute daze, that inevitability, and she walks along. And in seeing it, you know how it is when you've had a letter which is to do with, I've had letters saying, dear Mr. Hughes, we regret to inform you that you have not got a job, or whatever it might be, or some medical report, or something like that. And what do? Your words, your eyes rather home in on the key words of that. And that's what she will have seen. It's the flash. Suddenly, this, what have we got here? Look at that. It's all one. It's just moved into one. Flash news is in her hand. Strange way of putting it. It's suddenly in her hand. It's just suddenly there. Not taken, not handed over. There's no ceremony or reverence to it. It's just in her hand. Of meaning it dazes to understand, because her mind is suddenly like this fog as well. Those shapes so short. And suddenly the words there, words. Look at that very formal bit of punctuation. This is the letter that she's got. Not a personalised letter, nothing like that. Simply saying, he has fallen in far south land. South land, we mean South Africa. He has fallen. This idea of what we call the euphemism. The euphemism is when you say something unpleasant and put it in slightly more pleasant language. But he's died. That's the bottom line. He has died. And it's